as we always say, that's the time to clean up your language on the church's website now.
Yeah, right.
So this will be our last Thursday for a while, and I'm not quite sure what a while means here. It could be that we'll start again in February, only because we could start the first couple of weeks, but then Howard and I go to Rwanda for 2 weeks. And so it's kind of hard to start and then stop, and so we'll. But that's what I'm thinking right now, unless there's another way to do it. January is a good time to begin because everybody's coming back. So I don't want to miss that opportunity, but like I said, we won't be here. A lot happening today here at church. Jenny, welcome. It's so good to see you here.
It's so good to be here.
So we've got a funeral today. For Bud Miller, and the bishop is coming down to do it, which is quite remarkable at 1 o'clock. Barbara has just been and Bud, but Barbara in particular has been just a very loyal worker for the Synod for years and years and years. He's just done anything the bishop has asked, and so he just canceled everything and came down. So that'll be at 1 o'clock. On Saturday, one former member here, he's getting married, Robert Lynch, to Mary Elizabeth Beadle. They came one time, we all remember memorably. He sort of introduced her to us, sort of. It was he was in love and was not as articulate as it normally is, but that'll be at Naples Community Church on Saturday at 4 o'clock, and I'll be helping out with that service. So I'll try to keep the homily to 5 minutes, although Robert has already told me what I'm supposed to say. And if I just follow his script, it'll be about half an hour. That's just the way he's designed.
Church,
If you take 41, you go across Fifth Avenue and go about a block or two, can't remember if it's a block or two. They are in a former bank building. It's actually quite a beautiful building right there. So you kind of go through the light on Fifth Avenue and you keep going about 2 blocks, and it's pretty prominent. All right.
It's
kind of a fancy
7th Avenue. 7th Avenue.
7th Avenue, right?
Used to have plays in
Yes.
it. Yeah.
Was it a theater?
Yeah, they have a theater.
So the pastor, Kurt Anderson, I just met him, but I've heard a lot about him, but I just met him 2 weeks ago. And he was the pastor of First Presbyterian downtown. Years ago, did a $13 million renovation. And afterwards they kicked him out. So
I like building a house with your wife.
now right? There's a story there. But that was, it used to be, I mean, kind of the wisdom of pastors where you build a new church and 18 months later you're gone. That is almost always happens, because often I think the logic is that's what we're shooting for. We're shooting for this big goal. And once we hit the goal, I don't have anything else. I got nothing else. I hit what I want to achieve, so to speak. Not always the case, but it often is. So there was a conflict, but a lot of people loved him. They just followed him to found the spot. They're renovating that spot now. It's one of the churches that people talk about here in Naples. So that will be exciting. You notice all the activity over at the sanctuary this morning, the tiles going in. That's pretty exciting. So we'll just see how quickly they work over the holidays. So some of you have more experience with workers over the holidays. So quite a bit in the case.
Are the pews here?
They will be delivered, I believe the delivery date's the 5th of December. So it looks like they're gonna be here in plenty of time. So the tile's a big deal. You figure they can't put they have to have the tile and the carpet in to put in the pews, obviously. So, I would think if everything goes to plan and the pews are being, shipped in, I think from Nebraska. So, if that all works, that's pretty good at that point. Because the painting, I think is completed, now they might have to still complete some, small pieces, they're gonna put in some stonework. They've taken out basically the whole wall as you enter. So there's no more glass, there's no more pillars, they've just left the steel beams. But they're gonna surround them much smaller, but with stone. Which will match some of the other things that they're doing up front, so it'll give a more of an open feeling when you walk in and. It's gonna be quite a change, because we're used to walking in and there was like that little narthex, well, that's kind of gone. So anyway, that is exciting as well. The Sunday forum this week is on Thanksgiving. So, we added a few new pieces, but the old piece, here's why you should watch it. I just had to, I kept a Thanksgiving greeting from Teresa. In the Thanksgiving, and I just couldn't take it out. So part of it, I think, is that when you watch it, is giving thanks for her.
Is she doing the same, any better?
No better. The same, but in that little piece that she did 2 years ago, it's very touching to hear it now. I'll just say that. I won't quote. It's a very touching piece.
And this morning I was trying to consolidate some of my things in my prayer journal. And first thing that said was pray for so-and-so, a friend of Teresa's.
Oh,
And she had died, and so.
okay.
It just popped up, right?
And now that I think about it, I have a show and tell, but I've got to run quickly into my office and get it.
Okay.
So entertain yourselves. I'll be back.
Please, Saturday Night Live.
What?
Oh,
It's funny because, yeah,
Talking with yourself, and I can't.
it's not personal, sorry,
Yeah.
but we know so many people that have
You're doing
either
great.
done a major renovation. Or they build a house and it's like, it must cause a lot of.
So this week is, we're doing a Thanksgiving Sunday forum. This week we're doing a Thanksgiving Sunday forum because we're celebrating here at church Thanksgiving on Sunday. So a week early. The week after the Sunday forum is going to be on Advent. And we're going to try to promote devotions at home during Advent. And there's 3 ways we're promoting it. First of all, the classic is to have an Advent wreath that you put together. And it's a way of reminding yourselves of devotion. But it's also pretty public. Now, some of us live alone, but others are in families, but you light the candle. And that's when you have your devotion. Some people would just do it on Sunday. Others do it all week. So I hope that's part of your tradition. It's a lovely tradition because you have it there on your table or wherever you place it. It's just a good reminder because you walk by and you see it and you go, yep, I have to do a special.
There are probably a lot of organizations that do this, but Luther Seminary does an Advent devotional as a daily thing.
And we are stealing it this year.
Okay, because I've already printed mine out.
Okay, love divine, loves excelling. So the second way we're doing this is with Advent calendars. And I bought 4 Advent calendars to show off. It's interesting because they call it an Advent calendar, which is an ecclesial term, but almost Jesus just doesn't show up on any Advent calendars.
It's just up to the 24th.
Pamphlet.
Now you can go to there's some very classy stores, very up and where the Advent calendar is a piece of jewelry each and every day, 24 days before Christmas. Okay, I didn't buy that. But here is Godiva chocolate, which is something to look forward to. Now, some of us grew up with Advent calendars. And knew as kids, it was just great to get that little awful piece of chocolate. Remember that, because those were old, you know, sometimes the chocolate had kind of gone grayish, because they were ancient. But I've already tested this one. These are really good. Oh, they're really good. So the idea is you're not gonna forget devotions because you get your diet chocolate for the 24 days before Christmas. Now, there's others as well. This is kind of the standard that we used to get. I should pass these around. When we were kids, but you notice they're almost always the old Christmas scene, you know, kids dressed in the 30s and 40s, with Santa Claus kind of with the mistletoe, I mean, kind of class. This is what I grew up with, basically. And the chocolates aren't very good.
They're the butt much thinner than the Godiva.
Which is a good thing. And this is a new one that Walker's shortbread, which is really, really very quite nice. And I opened up the one of them on the 8th just to see how they package the shortbread, but it's a nice little treat with tea or something. Again, it's to say, I really, it's making devotions enjoyable. Something where you do make a cup of coffee, drink some tea, you look forward to it, so it's very nice. I did buy a 4th one, which I cannot show you because it's tea sort, an assortment of tea each and every day, so it's actually what you would make your tea with as well. Yeah, and I showed it to Olga, and now I'm afraid to ask for it back.
You get the Walker's one.
All these I got at Fresh Market. But last year I waited too long. They were being sold at Black Forest Restaurant, the German restaurant. They were being Polish deli. I can't remember the one on the off the East Trail had them. Publix had them for just a second. And they disappeared. They had almost 8 sorts of Fresh Market. I'd never seen it, so it was enjoyable just to see. And they're not inexpensive. The tea was not inexpensive, the Godiva, of course not, and the Walkers, but I just thought they were fascinating and interesting.
Fresh Market has got a huge supply of them.
Yeah, but they're gone.
Are they?
And that's what happened last year. I think I didn't think about it until after Thanksgiving. I thought, oh, I want to have that calendar. Gone, everywhere, gone. So, yeah.
Thanksgiving is so late. This year. It's the latest it could be. And then Advent.
Yeah, so that's why I wanted to, plus I'm using them in the devotions. Because this is another way, and then the third, Janet already alluded to it. We're going to encourage daily devotions with this. Our choir has already taped they're singing Love Divine, All Loves Excelling in 631. And then we will take each verse of that hymn and talk about how it speaks about Advent and encourage the daily devotions. Sorry, because it's built into that hymn.
On the back, there's all the calories. It was such a beautiful presentation. Who's gonna be wanting to look at calories?
I'm gonna say that.
It will surprise you that I didn't even look at that.
And everyone,
But shortbread, come on, it's just like a little piece of shortbread.
that little piece of shortbread is about a calorie. Wow.
We had a wonderful Scottish lady at UALC, and she had always promised to make me shortbread. And of course, we came down here and she up and died.
Oh.
Make fun of her.
So. It's all a way of Advent, of encouraging devotional life, and we remember that Advent is like an orchestra piece, it's an overture. It's not just an overture for Christmas. I think that's where I used to get this wrong. It's got all the themes of the church here tied into one. So just like when you go to a musical and you sit down and they play the overture, you get all of the themes of the whole piece. So you get it's kind of preparing you for the whole musical. That's what Advent is, preparing us not just for Christmas, but for some of these themes. And we've been running these on these Bible studies the last couple of weeks, the themes that run through the whole Bible, right? So today we're going to take a look at two, Messiah and Day of the Lord. The Day of the Lord is a real Advent theme because it's talked about often in scripture, the prophets, going back to early prophets on various epochs. And then, of course, the New Testament, Jesus comes, and when Jesus comes, it's the Day of the Lord. And then pointing to Revelation, end times, the Day of the Lord will come. So anytime it's D-Day, it's a big day when God shows up and things happen, right? And then one of those things, again, Advent prepares us for this. All right, so that's what,
And I just, you know, when I grew up, our advent calendar always was a religious theme. It was the nativity scene. And it's impossible to find an advent calendar these days.
I couldn't, yeah,
Yeah.
and you're right, the Fresh Market has about eight varieties. It's the best I've ever seen,
Mhm.
not one.
Yeah.
And you have to
Even
think,
online, it's hard to find.
who else is buying this? Religious people. I mean, really,
Yeah.
who
Maybe
else
it
would
may
say
be
Advent? What is
Catholic
Advent, right? I mean, an
Maybe
Advent
Catholic
calendar, what does it mean? And it's
It's like when they sell
Maybe,
those.
yeah.
so I don't know what the deal is, because Advent is such a insider church term.
Oh, yeah.
They had a whole bunch listed in Ollie's, you know, that cheap.
Ollie's.
Store.
Yeah, all these would have it, because that's German.
Yeah, I don't know if there are any religious ones or not, though, I just looked.
I would think.
I
would
think they were
so.
all like $14.98, I mean, they were not cheap and expensive, but I guess.
Well, this one, of course, is very inexpensive, like maybe $8 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
These are not.
No.
Those are all made here.
Are they?
That's interesting too.
Chocolate, yeah.
It's more of a European tradition, I think, that we've
Yep.
brought over, just, okay. Two, we're gonna watch the Day of the Lord first and Messiah. Again, part of this is promoting the website Bible Project. It's worth going and just snooping around. You've already seen what it does as far as Bible study for each book. And what I've suggested is, you know, even if you're doing a Bible study and focusing in on Romans chapter 8. Well, it's helpful to go to the Bible Project. You just write in Google Bible Project Romans, it pops up. And you, for a few minutes, as we've done the last 2 years, you play Romans and you get you get to see the whole forest before you take a look at the trees. That is you'll find it enriching. I do that every week before when I'm preparing to preach. What's the large topics first? And then how does the text that they gave me? Otherwise, you're just looking at a tree and a glorious tree, but you don't know how it fits into the larger picture. And sometimes it only makes sense if you've got the whole picture. It doesn't, you're sitting there, you can't figure out why in the world did they choose this text for this Sunday. So it's important. But then there's some themes too that run. And they've got about 15 of these. And they're just wonderful. I think you enjoy those. And we're going to, particularly, I think, with the second one, Messiah, we're going to take a look at something that will bore you silly. But we're going to do it. We just got to do it.
And it's all free.
What's that?
It's all free.
It's all free.
Bible Project.
One of the reasons I use it for sometimes the Sunday forum is because we don't have to pay any copyright. They just give it away. So that makes it just a marvelous resource. Now, I have to say some of those things, they have also podcasts. They have written Bible studies that you can pull down. So there's just free. The other one Janet knows is from Lutheran Seminary, Enter the Bible. It's also quite a good resource. But you have to get on their mailing list. I don't think give it away free now, but it's free. You just have to sign up and get on the mailing list. All right, Day of the Lord. But just before we run it, what to remember about that phrase, Day of the Lord? Do we remember anything about that phrase, Day of the Lord?
Well, I just think of this is the day the Lord has made. I don't know if that relates to it, but
I was thinking of the Sabbath. More than, any other day.
It could also mean the coming of the Lord,
You know,
the coming of.
It's coming.
It's a broad topic, a broad phrase.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to remember when I grew up, Sunday was the day of the Lord. I think that's how we'd say it, right? You can't work because that's the day of the Lord, right?
But you could say that every morning. This is the day.
The day.
Yeah.
Right.
Rejoice in the day.
And let us rejoice and be glad.
Yeah,
That's the whole idea about
Yeah.
it.
exactly.
But it also has the larger meaning of a special coming. Right? And so often, the prophets would say the day of the Lord is coming. That would not have been just
Sabbath coming up.
the Sabbath or this day is special. That we recognize God come into our lives on a regular basis, but in a special way. And often that means, okay, the Messiah is coming, the day of the Lord is coming,
Thank you.
or judgment is coming, the day of the Lord, which came when the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom, came when the Babylonians conquered the southern kingdom. And this became also a reference to the Day of Atonement, the day of the Lord when they fled Pharaoh and put blood on the doorposts. So all these all of a sudden become all linked together. Anytime God shows up in a powerful way, it tends to refer to the day of the Lord. I get a call now every 15 minutes from somebody in Minnesota who's trying to sell me something.
Ah.
It's literally every 15 minutes.
It's like the bridesmaids in the Bible, when he tells them to be ready, you know not what hour he will come to keep oil in your lamps, so.
Yeah, because the day of the Lord.
That's what I think,
Right.
that was the only thought I thought about the coming of the Lord, that was the only thought that came to my head immediately, but I used to be afraid of that. And I think it's saying to be prepared, for us to be prepared.
I had an interesting experience 3 weeks ago. I think I told you about it. It was a new housing. Michael Puhala plays a big role here in Naples in pulling together low-cost housing. He has to bring everybody together. I mean, the bankers, the builders, the city commissioners, to bring, it's literally many organizations have to come to make that doable, good project and affordable. All that's very important. So we were there, they asked me to do the prayer again, and so I talked about God's justice. And a guy came up, I knew he was evangelical, and what I meant by justice is God's coming with his righteousness and his justice to provide for seniors with housing needs. When he heard justice, he tensed up. He said, God's coming with punishment. And he told me, I couldn't imagine why at this time you would stand up there and call for God's punishment on the seniors living here. And so I thought, okay, that's interesting, right? That's where his mind went. So the day of the Lord, it cuts both ways. That's the thing. There is that idea of judgment, but for those who are oppressed, who have not experienced any justice or who are lacking attention from whatever government they were suffering under, this is good news. God's going to show up.
You're gonna say Maranatha, Maranatha.
Please come and straighten, basically straighten things out. So the day of the Lord is a loaded phrase. It's one that we will use in the Advent season because we remember Christmas, and that's the whole day of the Lord is coming. Jesus will be born, but of course, also he will come again. Maranatha, come Lord Jesus, right? Which is, I think, the third verse of Love the Bible.
And this is Christ the King Sunday, so it's very appropriate.
Christ the King is a very interesting Sunday. This is one of the most political Sundays that we have. That's not what we're going to do. But it was when Europe was really struggling in the 20s and 30s, and you had fascist governments and communism emerging on the east, and the Pope declared Christ the King Sunday to be the end of the year to say, don't panic, God is in control. So Christ the King was a political sermon, in the sense, not partisan, but political, God, just to remind Christians, don't give up hope.
Fairly recent then.
In church history, yes, in church, a lot of these other things go back to the 4th and 5th century, then this was rather recent, but we remember from our history what was going on in Europe in the 20s and 30s, and it was a lot of chaotic, everybody, Spain, Russia, Germany, Italy, obviously, there was just turmoil everywhere. And there the Pope's coming and saying, we're going to have Christ the King, right? So remember, not Christ the Lord, not Christ the Savior. I mean, he was making a statement, because Christ is the King. All right, so let's watch the day of the Lord and see if we pick up there. Are all the chocolates still there?
No.
The day of the Lord. It's a phrase in the Bible that religious people use, usually when talking about the end of the world.
Yeah, things like Armageddon or the apocalypse. You might be familiar with this image of Jesus returning on a white horse. He's got a sword to bring final judgment.
And everyone wants to know, how will it all go down?
So a lot of these images come from the last book of the Bible, but to understand them, you have to go back to the first book.
When the story begins, we watch God create an amazing world, and then he gives humans power to rule over it on his behalf.
But the humans are tempted by this mysterious, unhuman character who offers them a promise. You could define good and evil on your own terms and put yourselves in God's place.
Which is what they do. And the resulting stories are about the broken relationships and violence that results.
Yeah, this promise creates huge problems. Now everyone has to protect themselves and fight for survival, and they're all using death as this weapon to gain power.
It all leads to a story about the building of the city of Babylon.
Or in Hebrew, Bavel. Everyone comes together to elevate themselves to the place of God. And God knows how devastating this could be. A whole culture redefining good and evil as if they are God.
So God confuses their language and scatters them.
Now from here on, Babylon becomes like an icon in the biblical story. It's an image that represents humanity's corporate rebellion against God.
And the next time we see it is in the story of ancient Egypt.
Yeah, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, he feels threatened by these immigrant Israelites. He starts killing all of the boys, enslaving the rest.
And this is really evil.
Yeah, Egypt's like this bigger, badder Babylon. They take care of themselves at the expense of others by redefining evil as good. And so God turns Pharaoh's evil back on him. His pride drives him forward, and he's swallowed up by death.
Now after this great deliverance, the Israelites sing a song about how God is their warrior who liberated them from evil.
And the Israelites referred to this moment as the day.
The day they were rescued from a corrupt human system.
And every year since then, the Israelites have celebrated the day of their liberation with this symbolic meal of a sacrificial lamb. It's called Passover.
Eventually, Israel comes into its own land, have their own kings, and they face new enemies.
So that past day of the Lord, celebrated every Passover, begins to generate hope that God will bring the day again to save Israel from new threats.
Now, out in the hills was a sheep herder named Amos.
He was appointed by God as a prophet to announce shocking news to Israel, that God was bringing another day of the Lord against his enemies, and this time the target is Israel.
What?
Sadly, Israel's leaders had also redefined good and evil for themselves, resulting in corruption and violence.
So God's people have become like Babylon, the oppressed become oppressors. Babylon seems like a trap no one can escape.
And so the day of the Lord comes upon Israel. They're conquered, taken captive into exile, and from then on, Israel suffered under the rule of continuous oppressive empires.
This is the story Jesus was born into.
Yeah, in his day, the oppressive empire over Israel is Rome.
So, is Jesus gonna confront Rome, take him out?
Well, no. Jesus saw the real enemy as that mysterious, unhuman evil. The evil that's lured Babylon, Egypt, Rome, Israel. All humanity has given in to evil's promise of power. This is what Jesus resisted alone in the wilderness when he was tempted to exploit his power for self-interest.
But he didn't. And after that, he started to confront the effects of evil on others.
Yeah, he started saying that he was going to Jerusalem for Passover for a final showdown to confront the evil of Israel and Rome by dying.
Dying? I mean, that feels like losing.
Jesus was going to let evil exhaust all of its power on him, using its only real weapon, death. Jesus knew that God's love and life were even more powerful, that he could overcome evil by becoming the Passover lamb, giving his life in an act of love. And something changed that day. When Jesus defeated evil, he opened up a new way for anyone to escape from Babylon and discover this new kind of power, this new way of being human.
Okay, so something changed. But the power of evil is still alive and well, and we keep building new versions of Babylon.
Right, and so the last book of the Bible, the Revelation, points to the future and final day of the Lord. It's when God's kingdom comes to confront Babylon the Great, this image of all the corrupt nations of the world.
Yeah, this is it. Armageddon, final judgment. How is Jesus gonna finish off evil?
Well, that's not how you'd expect. In the Revelation, the victorious Jesus is symbolized by a sacrificial bloody lamb. And then when Jesus does arrive in the end, riding his white horse to confront evil, he's bloody before the battle even starts.
Pre-bloodied? That's a strange image.
Yeah, it's because Jesus isn't out for our blood. Rather, he overcame with his blood when he died for his enemies. And the sword is in his mouth. It's a symbol of Jesus' authority to define good and evil and hold us accountable when he brings final justice once and for all.
And so, in the meantime, the day of the Lord is an invitation to resist the culture of Babylon.
And it's a promise that God will one day free our world from corruption and bring about the new things that he has in store.
Thanks for watching The Bible Project. This theme video is one of many that we make, and you can watch them here on our YouTube channel or on our website.
We pick up.
Jesus is all we need.
To do what?
To go forward. He helps us with everything.
And do what?
Pardon?
And do what?
To survive in all our life and in the future, we can just trust in him.
Yeah, let's build on that. Trust in Jesus, to carry on, to move forward. Here's where I'm trying to push that. Some would say the disciples, and for example, oh, we trust Jesus to overthrow Rome. Right?
The way they expect it.
So they were trusting Jesus alone, but to do what? To overthrow Rome. So when it was clear he's not overthrowing Rome, whoa, I mean, that was a shock for, and some didn't recover. Judas is the obvious example here where, if that's not what you're going to do, I'm not in for that. So it's interesting here. Here's where we're gonna get into atonement theory. What is it that Jesus does? Does it say here that
He takes on sin for everybody, to free everybody else.
sin, especially from the evil forces that are out there, sin and evil forces? This is the primary message when you're hearing him do this, and you're going to hear the next one do the same thing, of the Gospels and Acts. In the Gospels and Acts, there is a theory of atonement, which is a little different than in Paul. We're always asking, what is it I'm trusting Jesus to do? And through the history, and this is a bottomless pit, okay? So if you want to follow up on this, this is endless, what you can read, what you discover. The church never clarified in the first centuries what it is Jesus actually did, or what was the theory behind it. It's just that in his death and resurrection, we are free
from death.
Free from death, and we are atoned, which means at one. Just think of at one with God. And then people kept saying, well, how did that work? Never clarified. just he died, he rose again, we are now at peace and have God's favor. Well, people are gonna fill that void. Now, it's such a void that no one ever pressed it. So now there's some logic there, right? It'd be like you've been married for 40, 50, 60 years and someone says, well, you know, why do you love your husband? You know, I don't know. Why do you ask? I just do. I mean, I've just backed it up with 50 years of my life, you know, but so some questions, it's not that they're inappropriate, it's they're just hard. What are you most supposed to say? Because he gets up every morning and makes me breakfast and cares for me, and then when you make the list, it almost is diminutive.
Yeah, trivial.
Trivial, yeah. And you're going, well, yeah, those are all important to me, but there's something bigger going on. What is it? I don't know. Love is a mystery sometimes, right? And so that's sort of that feeling. So you notice in the creed that we confess every Sunday, it's not clarified. A lot of things are clarified in the creed, like the two natures of Christ in the Nicene Creed, who for us and for our salvation, right? It came down from heaven, so there's a lot of the story, but not what the logic was. Why did Jesus have to go to the cross? So this is debated. Reformation feels like they have to clarify some things. Up to that point, people were left to just say, just like a husband, wife, I'm in love with you. You know, what's the classic line? You know, I told you that when we got married, and if it changes, I'll let you know. But then people are, you know, there's always one person in the couple says, yeah, but why is it you love me? What is it you love about me? Don't push it. You know, I just do. No, but then, right? We want to know, that's what was happening before the Reformation. So
I think of Tevye and Golda.
Yes.
yes, what was wrong?
Right.
And then he answers, yes, I love you. So that would be like, yes, we are redeemed.
But do you love me?
How does that keep going?
You all respond. Does she
Well,
respond? Does Golden respond?
At the very end, I think.
I guess, yeah.
Or
Yes,
there's
okay.
a lot of-
Well, I guess maybe I do or something.
Yeah.
Watch it.
Yeah. I wash the clothes and cook your meal.
There it is.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, I guess
all
I
these
do.
things.
That's a great.
Have your kids.
It's very Russian too. All right, so. One word that, all these words are used in the Bible. The problem is when you push the metaphor, it starts to fall apart. Does that make sense? Because anytime you use a metaphor to explain a mystery, it's helpful, but you gotta be careful. So ransom, right? What's the idea? It's a financial term. When we buy back something, right? Used to be, you bring your bottles back. Remember that way? Back in the day? Bring bottles and they pay for it. So you could ransom. This was a big deal in medieval Europe that we still have it today, right? Someone will be kidnapped and you have to pay a ransom to come back. That was been a big deal forever. And then the Bible uses this, that we have been ransomed. Paid for us on our behalf. All right. But then in the Reformation, they're saying, well, wait a minute. If Jesus paid our ransom, who did he pay it to? And they were like, what? No, really, who did he pay it to? Did he pay it to God? That doesn't make sense. Well, did he pay it to the devil? So many were saying he was paying it to the evil forces who had taken us. In other words, the idea is we've been given over to evil forces, and Jesus redeems us. He ransoms us. And that makes sense until you say, well,
But we're
did
still
Jesus,
sinners.
what?
But we're still sinners.
Walk back. That's the idea, but who did you pay? So Jesus paid for our sin. If you're using that metaphor, paid for our sin, who did he pay? So the Reformation is not feeling good with what this metaphor. So then you get two more metaphors in the Reformation. One, well, actually a couple of them. Calvin comes with two of them that are still used today, and that is a vicarious satisfaction or a penal idea of satisfaction. The penal idea is you're in a courtroom. Some of us have heard these examples. You're in a courtroom and someone says, all right, Ray, you're guilty. You gotta pay your debt to society. And then wait, you know, that's the way the story is told. Then Jesus comes in and says, I'm willing to pay Ray's debt.
Okay.
So we say, that's good.
That.
So that's penal substitution, which is Jesus pays the debt that I owe. And some said there's so that's called vicarious justice, or the other is God's wrath has to be expressed. So it's not just like a courtroom, it's not the wrath of the judge. The judge is saying, you broke the law, therefore there is a debt to be paid. Again, you push to whom? And this other is God's wrath has to be satisfied. God's sense of justice has to be satisfied, very similar to the penal one. And instead of striking Ray, God strikes Jesus. And that's the way the cross is explained. It's God's wrath being expressed. Jesus takes on our sin, and therefore, because he does that, God's wrath is taken out on him on our behalf. Not an abstract notion of justice, but a concrete sense. Some call this one objective, vicarious satisfaction, objective penal, because it's a concrete thing you did wrong, and therefore it has to be covered. That's just a system of justice, and it's actually God's wrath that has to be satisfied.
Then you can take that back to Adam and Eve, though, in the Garden of Eden, right? I mean, because that's the original sin, bad doers, you know.
But nothing is ransomed or redeemed. They're just cast out. So God's
Right, but
wrath
Christ comes
is.
to ransom. I mean, does it go all the way back?
So here we go, okay.
But here, this.
You're doing the right thing, is now we're following up on each of these metaphors, and so everybody is trying to do this in the Reformation. And these are all metaphors coming from scripture, so they're not just making them up, right? And so, kind of interesting. Luther comes along and uses a third category, which I'm going to call Christus Victor, and you're going to get this in the next film, and you got it in this one, but it was subtle. Because here it's not Jesus is paying for sin. There's no penal issue here. It's not a courtroom scene that we saw. It's rather this third one, that Jesus takes on the forces of evil represented by Babylon. So here there is an epic battle between good and evil. And so Revelation. But also they say, going back to Genesis, that then you've got the beast of Revelation is the snake in Genesis. And so here Jesus has to take on the snake. And what is that text that we read in Genesis about this confrontation between evil and the child of the offspring of Eve? Do you remember this?
Yeah, I think Stephan said something there, but
You just see if you can find anybody. I'll just try to quote it. Eve, you will produce offspring. Now he's talking about the Messiah. Well, doesn't use that term, but he's talking about the Messiah, who will come and stamp on his head. In other words, he's going to kill this beast. He's going to deal with the beast. It's an epic battle.
yeah.
Okay, but
I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. To the woman, he said, I will make pains in your childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband. And you will...
So first of all, there's a curse on work, and be fruitful and multiply, and all fruitful and multiply things are now cursed. So the man will not be able to produce well in the ground. If there be, it's making a living is gonna be tough. And giving childbirth is gonna be painful. But in addition, there's gonna be this fight between the Messiah, the offspring of the thing, and he will defeat you. He'll step on your head, but you're gonna bite him. In other words, you're gonna create some damage there. There's this epic battle between Messiah and the forces of evil, and that's what Luther would talk about. Here, there's no payment for sin. That's not the big issue. There's no courtroom scene. There's no God being violent against his son. Rather, it's the Messiah has been sent to do an epic battle to defeat evil, which would then include sin and other forces that are out there. That's a different stress.
That's a good one. I like that.
So it's the reason you're here.
I know.
Yeah. So you can see where people are struggling with this because they're trying to use metaphors from their life with biblical references. And what happens is often then we get it slightly wrong because we're letting the metaphor rule instead of the biblical text. So it's not a courtroom scene mostly here. As you saw, was there a courtroom scene here? You know, I'll pay for your debts, you know, no, none of that. Is there a vicarious? There is, in that when Jesus defeats the forces of Babylon, wherever they show up, sin and evil, then we are given the victory. He defeats on our behalf. So Luther, now, there's something to make this really messy. I can't say one's right and the other are wrong. I mean, Romans talks about the wrath of God. So each of these has some rootedness in the biblical text. But I think Luther was a closer reader of scripture than Calvin. Just gonna say it.
Biased.
Calvin was more of a systematic theologian, so he's trying to put these together in ways that made sense to him. Building on the Catholic tradition. Luther is just reading the text. So the text, especially in the Gospels, it's an epic battle between good and evil, and that comes out with even healing. Healing is part of the epic battle against evil. Right? So it's not courtroom scene, you know, it's evil forces are there.
Right.
And now trust the kingdom of God, the victory over the day of the Lord is coming. Trust in Jesus. That's where your trust in Jesus. But trust in Jesus as the champion over evil. That was not a substitute for sin. They wouldn't have understood that at this time. Also, in these things of Calvin, it really doesn't emphasize the resurrection. The death of Jesus is satisfying God's wrath or the penal code, but not the resurrection. Here, there's no victory if Jesus doesn't get out of the grave. Right? There's no victory. The death of Jesus is not, it's only victorious because he raises up. And that's part of the message of the gospel. Even John says he's enthroned on the cross, but he only says he's enthroned on the cross because he's going to raise. Otherwise, there's no victory. Okay, are we confused? Okay. So to go back, none of this is clarified in the creeds. Creeds just don't go there. They just say it happened. I fell in love with my wife. Why? I don't know. It just happened. It was just one day, you know, I looked at her and said, I love it. So then you try to figure it out. You take your whole rest of your life trying to figure out why did that happen, right? So there's some of that, we call it mystery of atonement, that we're falling in love with God, and it's because of Jesus' cross and resurrection. And then some of us spend our whole lives trying to figure that out. Is it worthwhile? Yes, but never ever take away the mystery of what happened through metaphors or philosophical or theological.
You go up a few thousand feet it just seems to me that there's this epic battle. Maybe this is where you're headed, between good and evil. If you look at the whole thing, it's like this, there's stuff that we don't understand because we're not in heaven. But it seems to me that the epic battle between God and the devil who revolted against God is much bigger and yet to be fulfilled completely.
So that is number 3.
And I think of Thomas, I think of doubting Thomas, this is for me right now. When he said he would not believe unless he put his finger. And Jesus said to him, greater is he who believes in me, who has not done that. And that's the mystery again, for me, is that's what comes to my mind. Why do we feel the need that we have to understand everything? I think sometimes it's good to embrace the unknown. Because when we get to the other side, we will know. I don't know that I feel I have to know everything right now. It's full trust. I have to trust.
Okay, because I'm a theologian. We say it's faith seeking understanding. I still seek understanding, but I do it from a faith. So if I ask, why did I fall in love with my wife? If I'm doing it as someone who's still in love with her, that's a different position than I'm neutral now. I'm gonna try to figure out whether I should love her. Those are two different
Right, they are, yeah.
processes.
Yeah.
The one is I recognize I'm in love. I'm trying to figure out why. The other is I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna block that love until I figure out what's going on.
But some of it still is a mystery, because you can't define it. It's not definable.
So that is in the Gospels, though, you do have the epic battle. And Thomas does not believe that Jesus come out victorious over evil, because how could you be resurrected? And what doesn't make sense to me. But Thomas is not asking this. Or that doesn't mean they're bad. Just means that's not where the Gospels talk about this epic battle. So every healing is part of the epic battle against evil, forces of evil, where Satan is still trying to attack the disciples. Right, and Jesus finally, there's a quote there, I almost had you stop it, where evil is allowed to do its best on Jesus. Evil is given permission to attack him and kill him. That's the Genesis passage. And then it says here, when evil had exhausted its resources, Jesus emerges victorious. So you almost let the battle. God in a way allows evil to do its worst on his son. And then Jesus emerges victorious, which then breaks that power. If it can't defeat Jesus, then it can't defeat us who participate in his life. This is different storytelling, right? Than, in the Gospels, there's a sin that has to be legally dealt with.
I think it's interesting that Thomas doesn't believe without the physical proof, but Jesus is gracious and merciful to him and allows him, okay, touch me, put your hand in my side.
Yes.
Remarkably.
He doesn't condemn him for that unbelief.
But he gives us
Or
a
that
blessing.
doubting.
Yeah, but he gives us a blessing, those that have not seen, but yet believe.
And so to go to that point, there are several stories where people are not trusting Jesus as the champion, but still say, oh, it's still the law. I trust the commandments. I trust, and there Jesus is quite firm, right? Like with the rich lawyer, where he says, well, okay, you want to follow me? Good. Give up all that you have and follow me. So he's trying to expose his sin. Sin, though, is not trusting him as the Messiah. And when you say Messiah, that's shorthand for the person who's come to step on the head of the snake. And of course, Jesus wants to say the snake is evil. It's not Rome. Rome is given into the snake. Babylon gave into the snake. is part of the battle, but that's not the true enemy is Rome, yes, but it's we got bigger fish to fry here. I mean, there's an epic battle against good and evil here, not just against Rome.
But even when Jesus was in the desert for 40 days, when the devil tempted him in every way he could, you're hungry, I will give you bread. You're tired, I will give you rest.
Yeah.
So if that was the worst evil, I think that was the predecessor to Jesus, obviously going to the cross. I mean, he was really tested then.
I think that's the reason that story is told in the beginning of Matthew 4, to say that the testing is already, the battle has begun. The battle has begun, and Israel was never supposed to play that role and couldn't. They always would give in to temptation and evil. So now we have a champion who does not give in to those forces. All right, let's play the second one now. And notice, the reason I'm pointing this out, because these are subtle pieces. I realize that. Notice how Christ's victory is going to be displayed in this next video. Forces of evil. Jesus is going to be champion fighting evil, not these other two atonement theories. It's subtle, but you'll see it.
Yeah.
There's this crazy story at the beginning of the Bible. We have Adam and Eve, and they're in the Garden of Eden.
And everything in this garden is great. It's exactly as it should be, except there's this one tree that they're told by God not to eat from because it's dangerous and it will kill them.
So that's it. Avoid this fruit tree and we're fine.
Right, it seems pretty simple. But in this garden, there's a snake, and it starts telling a different story. It says that if you eat of this tree, it's not going to kill you. In fact, it's going to make you become like God.
And Adam and Eve, they believe the snake and they eat the fruit.
And because of this, the goodness of the garden is tragically lost, and evil and death enters into God's good world.
Now, why is there a talking snake in the garden? I mean, this thing is a problem.
Yeah, it's very strange. And even more strange is the fact that the Bible doesn't say why or how this thing even got there. It just presents the snake as this creature who's in rebellion against God and that wants to get other people to doubt God's goodness and lead them on a path towards death. And so whatever this snake is, it's the source of evil that pervades our world and our lives, even still today.
But there is some hope, because right here in the story, God makes this really interesting promise to Adam and Eve.
That someone is going to come in the future, a son of Eve. And this guy's going to come and he's going to crush the serpent's head and destroy evil at its source. However, during this battle, the serpent is going to bite this guy's heel.
So it's like a mutual destruction.
Yeah, it's this very strange but beautiful promise. And it's just left hanging there until the next key moment in the story, when God singles out this guy named Abraham and says that through his family, goodness and blessing is going to be restored back to all of the nations of the world. And as we follow this family, we get to one of Abraham's great-grandsons, this guy named Judah. And he receives this promise that a king is going to come from his line and that the whole world's going to follow this king, and he's going to bring peace and harmony, and there'll be lots of food and wine and milk and vineyards, and it's going to be awesome.
The first king that we meet from the line of Judah is a guy named King David. And he's a hero. Maybe he is the snake crusher.
But it turns out that David is infected with the same evil as the rest of humanity. He never crushes the snake, just the opposite. However, God makes a promise to David that this king is going to eventually come from his line. But as you go on in the story, one by one, each generation of his sons, they're just total chumps. They give in to the snake, they choose evil, they go after money and sex and power and following other gods.
Things get so bad that they run the nation of Israel right into the ground, and the big bad empire of Babylon just takes them out.
And so now there are no more kings to even fulfill this promise.
So it seems like the whole plan is lost.
But during these dark days, there's this crazy group of guys called prophets, and they just kept talking about this coming king and reminding us of the promise that he'll come, he'll defeat evil, he'll restore the garden. Now, one specific prophet, Isaiah, he tells us more about why this king is bitten. Isaiah says that the promised king receives this wound because of humanity's evil, and then it kills him. But then all of a sudden he comes back, and Isaiah says it's because he suffered this wound that he can now become a source of healing to other people.
But the Old Testament ends, and the snake-crushing king that everyone's been talking about never shows up.
And this is why, when the New Testament begins, it introduces us to Jesus of Nazareth, not as some random guy, but as someone who comes to fulfill these specific ancient promises.
Yeah, we learn that he's from the line of David, Judah, and Abraham.
And he goes around Israel announcing that the goodness of God's kingdom is here, now. And he begins confronting the effects of evil on people by healing them, by forgiving them of their sins and evil.
Many people are now believing that this is, in fact, the promised king.
But Jesus began telling his closest followers that he was going to become king and bring peace by taking the full effect of humanity's evil into himself.
The fatal snakebite wound.
Exactly. And so it seems like the serpent wins. And this story actually would be a tragedy except for what happens next. Jesus rises from the dead.
And now Jesus has the power over evil and death for himself.
And so the rest of the New Testament is then making this claim that Jesus' power over evil and death has now become available to us to begin confronting the effects of evil in our lives.
But even still, death and evil are a real problem in our world all around us.
And so the story of the Bible ends by describing this future day when Jesus comes back and he finishes the job. He destroys the snake once and for all, and he restores the goodness of the garden here on earth. Hey, this is Tim.
And this is John.
We think one of the best ways to understand the Bible is to trace the key themes.
All right. I agree. All right, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I think that, again, I think it's a bigger deal. The battle is still going on.
Yep.
Salvation has been achieved, but the ultimate battle is not complete. And that's going to happen. And I don't think being on earth, we can really understand it. I think it's bigger. It's universal. It's, you think about the heavens and the earth and the expanse of the universe. The battle is much bigger than our perception.
And that came out here, right?
It did, yeah. It did.
So now some will say, all these are true, but the biggest one is 3. This is victory. That's the big battle. This, Jesus wins the battle on our behalf. Right? And so by trusting him, he forgives us. So there's some of that language will be here, but it's all part of the epic battle. You can't forget the epic battle because that's the bigger story. These are smaller stories within the larger.
Interesting to me that when Christ lived on the earth was a very unusual time. Because it was the one time in the world where the Romans had essentially developed peace in what they'd conquered. So once Jesus died, there was a unique period in history where the gospel could be spread around the world. You think about it, it's a very unique time in history, never happened before. So the apostles were able to go out speaking Greek, right?
In the Roman world.
And go around the known world at the time. To me, this is really interesting. The other thing that's interesting is the fact that Jesus died a horrible death with physical wounds to give us faith that it really happened, if you will, as opposed to some other form of death or whatever. It made it very spectacular for us to help us believe that it actually occurred. To me, that's all part of the big plan.
Maybe that's part of the meaning of the Thomas story.
Yeah, because here again, he actually physically had to put his,
Yeah.
after the resurrection. To me, it's that in itself is a really important aspect of helping us believe in Jesus and what he did for us.
So one of the things I hear you saying, and I'll test it, is that when things happen to us, we're actually part of a larger epic story. And we have a temptation just to minimize it. But there are times to remember that whether it's conversion or, a child, you bring a grandchild to the baptismal font. It's not just about that child. The child's part of an epic story of good and evil and the kingdom spreading even into a small child, but the child's entering a pretty big story. Right, which we tell at Christmas, we tell at Easter, we tell at times, but we can forget that there's something larger and it's still happening, right? That's your point, still playing itself out.
Yep.
Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Other entity. Again, you didn't see a courtroom scene here. Although you could say God was punishing Israel, we saw that in the day of the Lord, right? And they needed forgiveness, and so there is that penal quality that God's wrath against those who have turned on them. But the bigger story is they turned on God, and that they forgot the bigger story of what God's trying to accomplish in the world. I love this piece because they kept calling it, when is the snake crusher coming? They wouldn't let us forget. It goes back to Genesis,
Yeah.
which we
do.
which we do, absolutely. Forget that, oh, this is all part of this epic story. And so I love that, the snake crusher, who's, we're waiting for the snake crusher, Messiah, who's the snake crusher. Well, I thought that was helpful for me in following the whole storyline. All right, we want to divide up in our groups now. 2 themes, Day of the Lord, right? And that's what we're praying for, is the snake crusher, basically the epic story to play itself out to its final chapter. And then this Messiah, which is kind of playing out a certain story of the defeat. Now, I mention this because most of us were raised with this one. Right? The vicarious, that's way before the judge example, right? You got a debt to pay, gotta pay your debt to society, and you pay up all, and then Jesus comes and says, I will pay that for you, right? This is the one we were not raised in, although I think in Sunday school, this would have appealed to me a lot more. Because, when you grow up as a kid, you just watch cartoon after cartoon of epic battles of good and evil.
Right.
We're kind of drawn to those, right? And yet, this is what we kept telling kids. It's you're gonna go before a judge. All right. Divide up into groups, see what you pull out. Any insights,
We don't know a heck of a lot.
Yeah.
Wait, when we get to heaven, we're gonna know it all.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
The one thing we were talking about is, why must everything be done electronically? Why are we not having services? Why do we not have a women's group? Why do we not have a men's group? Why do we not have a bulletin?
Be thankful for what we do have.
Yeah, what do we have?
We have a place to go.
Oh.
Well, this church is getting
Well,
renovated.
that-
A lot of people don't have
have
that.
Most of the bulletin is projected up
Up on the
screen.
Yeah, but what happens to the poor people who can't be there? I can't take a
Online.
bulletin to a friend.
No, but the bulletin is in your email.
Yeah, but see, what if you don't have a computer?
You don't need a computer, you need it on your phone.
Phone. It's
What?
it's
On your phone? Yeah, you get it from me, okay.
That's all right.
Yeah.
It's on your phone.
I almost pull up the bulletin, to look at ahead of time.
So you can get a friend to print it off for you, or get a relative to print it for you. That's, that's the easier one to answer.
Yeah, that's easy.
It saves massive time, for as many of you know who used to have to put that together.
Yeah, right, that was fun.
Expensive and time consuming, and took staff time that we can now use for other things. So you always look for efficiencies.
I can tell you, I was at Voices of Grace last night. We just our second year into the kids
We
and
did.
singing.
I saw
We
that.
had 40, 50 people for dinner. Kathleen made tacos and then we had the kids go into the music room. So all the parents sat in the bleachers and the kids were down there ringing bells and singing. And it was heartfelt. You'll all see it. We'll put it online for you, but
Yeah, that's it. We don't get to see those precious kids in person.
well,
We will.
yeah, you will, but just to say something you don't see that's happening
Yeah.
is, and that is good. Was just heart touching. So I mean, that, nobody knows, but the church was rocking last.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
About electronics, it's interesting. I just read an article about a Swiss experiment in AI Jesus.
Oh.
So the guy set it up as an experiment to force people to think about electronics and spirituality. And you had to find some documents, you don't share, information you don't want to share, blah, blah, blah. So they set it up. 2/3 of the people, it's a confessional. So instead of having a priest, you use AI.
Oh. Okay.
2/3 emerge from the confessional booth saying they had a spiritual experience.
Third, wow,
2/3.
interesting.
And it's 24 hours, doesn't get tired, speaks 100 languages.
Oh, my goodness. Oh.
Yeah, so
As for your name,
I know.
It only records it and puts it up in the cyberverse.
Yeah.
What it says about spiritual appetite, it's the human race is hungry for God. That's one thing I hear from that, even though they may not go to church, the world is changing when the hunger to connect
Exactly.
with God.
A lot of that happened during COVID,
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
because there was a lot of despair and people
Mhm.
dying and it really was a big turn to God.
Absolutely. And you got people who are in despair and they're maybe in their car somewhere and they're on the side of the road. The only thing they have is their phone.
Yeah.
And they could go to, not only this, but other things that are out there.
Or can't make it to church.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's a hologram preacher will probably be coming to you.
Is that it?
Whatever dialect.
I'll wait for the pink slip.
I'm so old fashioned, I still like the human touch. And I like when we come out of church and we either shake your hand or get a hug. And I remember, and of course it depends on your situation, but we who are widows, I remember at a church in Marco, these two little old ladies, they just could not wait because Durwood, who was our pastor, they said, "Oh, Durwood gives the best hugs."
Oh.
And I thought, oh, bless your heart, they just need that human touch. Yeah. And Durwood weighed over 400 pounds. So when you were hugged by Durwood,
Got your money's worth.
I said something one time to a friend and they said, "Have you met his dad?"
Uh-oh.
Oh.
I think that's why, I think you notice it here, that people are coming before worship now. Not just because there were pies and cakes this week, but also they're staying longer afterward. And that's a big deal. I mean, it's one of the reasons we want to build the atrium, is that the fellowship, where you can just come early or stay late, and it's comfortable setting where you want to do that.
Yes.
For now, it get hot or humid, it's just not something you want to stay out there for more than a few minutes. So that's all really important and good.
I think it's really interesting how you install the stole on people at the end of the service. I think that's really meaningful. I hope you get good feedback or stories on.
Almost, not every week, but almost every week. Almost every week. I mean, Edie knows this with her grandson.
Oh, that was so special.
Yeah.
I mean, really so
And you don't know, I've tried to be disciplined and not plan it ahead of time, so it's spontaneous. 2 weeks ago, I really wanted to give it to David, Pastor Willard. And he wasn't there. I looked out and he was back there with Joy, so that
You
was.
knew that, right, somehow.
He was sensing something, so I saw, this was All Saints Sunday. Peter Wasserich and his family over there,
Oh.
and they were really grieving Gussie because she had died this last year.
Right.
This last week, Mark came up, Freebrick,
Mhm.
and he didn't tell me what had happened, just that
Oh.
something had happened. He said, you just don't know how special that is for me today. And that's all, so I don't know what was behind it.
Ask to see a picture. He became a grandpa,
When,
that's, I think about 2 weeks ago.
okay,
She's in England, and this little thing has now gotten a passport. She is a citizen of England, the US, and Canada. How can that one little person have all that? And I mean, of course, she's just absolutely gorgeous.
but the idea is not just about the individual, of course, it's vicariously about all of us. So Jim, you missed a lecture on theories of atonement, so I know you're be sad about that. But,
I'm just glad God's grace has got us all, right?
Yeah.
if you've got any ideas, again, right now, I think about starting in February, when we get back from Rwanda, hopefully with lots of good stories. But if there's a way of doing it in January, if there's some way to do it, I'll let you know. All right, let's end with a word of prayer. Good and gracious God, indeed, we're part of the big story. And we depend on you to fight our battles and to win them over the forces of evil. We thank you indeed that you are our champion. We pray for your blessing on these upcoming weeks. Give us a rich time in our families and individually as we enter deeply into thanksgiving, gratitude, and in all the wonderful areas that you provided for us through Advent and Christmas. Be with us, bless us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Me too.